Well, greetings, viewers, and welcome to another edition of Then, Now, and the Future, where Marcus and I are discussing the past, from the middle of the last century, the middle of the 20th century, up until now, and its significance. So we're sort of slowly beginning from, basically Marcus was born in the early 50s. I was born in the mid 60s. So we're sort of beginning that walk. And as we see it, we'll be getting more detailed as time goes on, especially as our memories become thicker, as it were, more of them. So yeah, Marcus, do you want to say something at this stage to sort of introduce it?
Yeah, really what you said, it will be some of my earliest memories, and we touched on some of these, I think, in our first edition, but just really looking at the transformation that's taken place in half a century. So, in the great span of things, that's a minuscule amount of time, and yet the amount of change that has taken place is phenomenal if you think about it. So I think we'll have a lot of fun. Just
yeah, that's it. I mean, yeah, if you compare, I suppose if you took some, decade or a century in what we would call the Middle Ages or something like that, you would see, much slower progress, wouldn't you, in the sort of the shape of people's environment and what's going on in their lives.
Yeah, I think it's the ability to go forward, and I think you've touched on a really good point. If you go back to times like the Middle Ages, their ability, their speed of progression seems comparatively slow. Everything, if you follow that through, just seems to get faster and faster. So, nowadays our ability to, I don't know, just look at mobile phones. They started off as huge bricks, didn't they? Carried in big cases, and in the space of a comparatively small amount of time, batteries have got that big. They last for hours. We can do more things on a mobile phone than anyone ever dreamed of, and we've done that really, really quickly. So I think the progression, medically and scientifically and all the rest of it, just seems to keep speeding up all the time. So I think what we're going to do is just take people back for a while to a slightly slower pace of life.
Yeah, in many ways. Okay, well then, best for you to start, because you were actually around in the 50s. So what are you going to tell us about first?
That makes me feel so old. Strange things I remember. Growing up as a child, boys didn't wear long trousers until they were probably into their teens. So, and this applied sort of across the board. You, as a child, you wore short trousers and socks. Short trousers, long socks. In the coldest of winters, that applied.
Yes.
I remember, getting chapped legs and, having wind whistling up my shorts in the middle of winter. You walked to school regardless of the weather. So if it snowed, you tramped to school. If it snowed, you still went out and played in the playground. Health and safety risk assessments were heard of. If it wasn't raining, you went out to play in the playground. And I remember at secondary school, we'd go out, we'd skate around on the ice, we'd fall over, our clothes would get soaking wet, and we'd have to go back into the classroom and do our lessons.
Well, I mean, what you're saying still applied. I was at, primary school in the early 70s. And that was the case. Shorts, we had shorts. So I had shorts, I think, all through primary school. And it was only at secondary school that I, started wearing trousers. And outside, You know, there was the hard playground, and then there was the grass, the sort of pitches and stuff. We used to run around all over the place. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and I think again we touched on this in our first edition, but you know, old-fashioned telephones, big black. I can't remember the material they were made of, but they were big and black, really bulky. So the handset rested on a cradle with a little dial in front, and you laboriously had to dial a number, and if you couldn't get through,
again, that was still 70s dial phones. Yeah, I guess they got lighter. Was it Bakelite? I don't know, is that the right material?
Bakelite.
Bakelite.
That's it. Bakelite.
Yeah.
Really,
so
really heavy telephones.
So it was still dial, wasn't it? I mean, that was well into the 70s that you had a, you know, dial-up phone.
That's right. So I lived in North London, bordering on East London. There was a program on TV not very long ago called Ridley Road. Ridley Road is a street market in Dalston in East London, and the program was based around Mosley and the Black Shirts, because there was a huge sort of fascist movement, a right-wing sort of fascist movement at that time. And my mother used to take me shopping once a week to Ridley Road Market.
Right.
And I remember on one occasion, I think it was a Sunday, I was with some friends, and there was going to be a huge fascist rally in Ridley Road. I remember being there early while everything was getting prepared, and there was a lot of anti-fascists already sort of starting to arrive to oppose them. And you could feel the electricity in the air. It was, you know, the tension was palpable.
So when was that? The sort of late 50s then, sometime?
That would have been towards the latter part of the 50s for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, Mosley and the Black Shirts were a huge.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I remember the word Mosley.
And there was a huge riot in a place called Cable Street in the East End. Very, very famous. You'll see reports of it still online.
Yes.
But a huge riot where Mosley and the Black Shirts were going to be marching through the East End, and the unions and the dockers and all sorts of left-wing people and anti-fascists and Jewish people all came out to oppose them, and there was just this absolutely massive
it was a punch-up kind of thing.
Very, very famous, and I think they may have made a film about it, you know, that riot at Cable Street. I can't remember, but so, you know, quite turbulent times.
Yeah, because we think of it often for the economic boom. I was just casting my eyes over Wikipedia, and it was listing the economic booms, you know, in various countries in this period, or what we would call the West, particularly, you know, United States and Western Europe. But we forget also this kind of thing, you know, that maybe, I don't know what the economic situation was so much in the UK. There was also a post-war boom, wasn't there, I think?
I think people were having to get used to having things again, because they'd been without things for such a long time that getting used to having things. So I grew up in a Jewish family, and we'd have lots of family get-togethers. So I remember my mother doing lots of cooking and baking, and, you know, having relatives round and all of that sort of stuff. But there was also getting used to new things like pasta. Pasta was quite a big deal. Getting used to the fact that you were starting to get things like Indian restaurants springing up. And again, that was quite a big deal. Starting to eat strange foods, foreign foods.
Yeah, that really sort of took off post-war, didn't it? I suppose.
Yeah.
Even more recently, it's got sort of multifaceted, isn't it? But
Yeah,
it was beginning then.
yeah, but it was, these were all really new experiences that that we had, and it often occurs to me now, back in the day, just going back to telephones, if I wanted to get hold of you, I
Yes.
could only get hold of you on a landline, and
Yes.
if you weren't home, if you weren't at the other
Yep.
end of the phone, we couldn't speak.
That's right.
And I just had to put up with trying and trying. And
Yeah.
trying.
Or you can leave a message, right? You can leave a message. Can I take a message?
Yeah. If you happen to be lucky enough to have someone at the other end of the phone who could take a message, and then you had to rely on them to pass.
Yeah, of course, there was all sorts of factors coming then, wasn't there?
Yeah.
But yeah, and that's till quite recently, really. I mean, relatively. I don't know when that changed, but.
Well, I don't. But these days, if I message you and you don't reply in about 5 minutes, why hasn't he got back to me?
What's going on? Yeah, yeah, that's right. That's right. We have to create this a bit of, in modern life, we have to create some sort of unavailability, don't we? Somehow that because we can't, we're not, we can't all be at 5 minutes notice for everybody.
That's right. But as kids. We used to play out in the street quite happily.
Yes.
Recycling is nothing new. As a kid, we used to get lemonade bottles from the local shop, and used to take it back and to get money back on the bottle.
Yeah, it's just been ideologized, really, hasn't it?
That's right.
Basically, it's a way of life anyway, isn't it?
Yeah. As I mentioned, my parents ran a grocery shop. They used to give out the food in paper bags.
Yeah.
So recycling and all of this stuff is not a new concept. My mother and father, would quite happily. I was about 5 or 6 when they closed the shop. So we lived in North London on a proper, on what could be described, I suppose, as an American block. It was you could walk all the way around it on the pavement.
Okay.
I remember having a little tricycle, and they would quite happily let me play outside on the street, and I would ride my tricycle round and round the block.
How old were you then?
Well, the shop was closed when I was about 5 or 6, so I would have been 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me of my own memory. I lived in South London in Blackheath, so I was 5 years old, and I can remember being on, as I say, in the building sites. We were off wandering around in the building sites. Yeah.
We had a common not far away when I was a little bit older. But I'm going out to play with my friends. We're going over the common. Yeah, okay, be back by whatever time.
Yeah.
And you used to go off and just play.
Yeah, that's it.
I don't know. It was. Were there bad people around? Well, probably. You just didn't hear so much about them. We didn't have this 24-hour news cycle.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm sure there were bad people around then, in the same way that there are bad people around now. But
yeah, I have a memory actually of an attempted abduction of me. Yeah. Somewhere I think we were somewhere in the centre of London, and somebody else was holding as I remember. I mean, it's just a sort of memory, but somebody else was holding my hand, and my father came and took me away. So
yeah,
I don't know what the story was exactly, but things like that happened, I guess. But
well, they did. I mean, if we fast forward just a little bit, I remember going up to with a friend to Trafalgar Square. So I would have been in my early teens, I guess.
Yeah.
Went up to Trafalgar Square Post Office because they were the only place to issue first day cover stamps, and I did a bit of stamp collecting. So we went there to get these first day covers.
Okay.
Yeah. So I would have been in my early teens, I guess, and a friend and I went to Trafalgar Square Post Office because we did a bit of stamp collecting, and they were the only place that we could get first day cover stamps quite early. And I think it was late afternoon, and we were coming out and were approached by a guy. Oh, do you want to come with me? Come to a party, whatever.
Oh, really?
And we started to go with him and follow him. And it suddenly occurred to us, and we suddenly looked at each other and said, "What are we doing? Where are we going?" And then we turned around and sort of ran for it. Who knows? Who knows what could have happened? So there's always been bad people around, but I think we just hear more about it.
Yeah, but obviously the general level of trust and just being relaxed. As I say, I said building site, but it was bomb site. We mentioned this fact, didn't we? They were all over London and I guess other cities, these empty spaces where buildings had been. Yeah. And it was that, and it was, you went through like a hole in the fence, and I don't know, it was like the basement was left over. I mean, it was,
Yeah, it was the best playground ever, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, amazing. I can remember all sorts of fun stuff we were doing there. But I mean, I guess no parent would dream of allowing that. Nowadays, it's completely, everything's hyper safe, isn't it? Antiseptic and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. But we used to play cowboys and Indians in the street, and when we were maybe a little bit older and starting to get a bit naughty, it was Knockdown Ginger. Did you ever play Knockdown?
Maybe remind me of the rules.
Okay, you just knock on somebody's door and run away.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I think that.
Why would you do that? But we used to think it hilarious.
Yes.
When we were little kids, let's ring the doorbell and just run away and hide, and then people would come to their door and they'd be looking around, and we'd be sort of down the road.
Yeah, I remember that kind of thing. That I don't know, I can't think of exact examples, but yeah, that kind of stuff. I can remember that was still going on.
Yeah,
I had a pretty bad feeling about it. I wasn't very keen on that kind of thing. I just didn't like the kind of atmosphere, but some people loved it.
Yeah. Red telephone boxes, which hardly see now, were on every street corner.
Yeah, sure.
If you didn't own a phone, and lots of people didn't own phones, that's what you had to do when if you were out and about somewhere. If I was when I got a bit older, but if you're out and about and you needed to phone home, to be a telephone box.
Yeah. Okay, and that, of course, reminds me of another great institution of the past, the telephone directory.
Yes.
And these were sometimes arranged in the phone box in sort of metal bindings, weren't they? And
it was a metal case with some sort of swing mechanism.
And you could swing it up, so, and then you'd sort of run down your finger looking for the surname,
Yeah. So, data protection would have a field day. But, alphabetical from A to Z. If you owned a telephone, you were in the telephone directory. There wasn't really any option, as far as I can recall, back in the day.
Well, there was an expression X directory. I remember that expression.
Yeah, so you could. Yeah, you could pay. You could pay a sum of money to not be listed.
Oh, right. So it was actually you became X directory by payment.
Yeah. You had to pay to be X directory.
Deleted from the list.
Yeah. In the same way that these days you can opt not to be on the public copy of the electoral register.
Okay.
So I guess that's similar, but
yes.
But yes, red telephone box and police boxes. Sort of Doctor Who police boxes were also regular things, because policemen, and I guess police women, there were some, but if they're out on patrol and they needed to call the station for some reason, the only way they could do that, there was a telephone link
of course,
in the police box.
Well, there's still a lot of those around in
absolutely there were. Because again, there weren't any mobile devices. I guess they didn't have personal radios at the time.
When I guess the next thing was walkie-talkies, was it? After
I guess so. I think the cars probably had some sort of radio.
Some sort of radio system.
But Bobby's on the Beat, because you used to see Bobby's on the Beat very few of them were in cars, if any. They're, obviously.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, Bobby, walking the beat. So you used to get to know your local Bobby.
Yeah.
And they used to get to know you. I think, as I mentioned, my parents' shop was opposite a police station, so
yes,
they used to come in for their rolls and sandwiches and
yeah. Okay, well, I guess that was something that must have been changing around that time. I mean, because I don't remember a local policeman. I know my parents had a friend who was a sort of, but he was some sort of investigator or detective or something, I think. So he wasn't really sort of on patrolling the streets, as it were. But
no, you had local Bobby, and you wouldn't dare give them the sort of lip that my wife and I sometimes watch these fly on the wall police programs. There's an abundance of them on TV.
Oh yes.
And you look at the back chat that coppers of today are getting from comparatively young kids. The back chat and the abuse they have to put up with from tiny little kids.
Really,
we wouldn't have dreamed of doing that. Yes sir, no sir. Wouldn't have dreamed of. And if a copper had dragged us home, to speak to our parents, well, that's sort of like the end of the world, really. So I guess moral standards seem to have shifted.
Well, I mean, there's no doubt about that, is there? Yeah, no doubt about
that. I think relatives, friends, neighbours were all extensions of the family in some shape or form, and were free to chastise you on behalf of your parents if you stepped out.
Okay, well, that's an interesting question then. Were your extended family in the same geographical area for most? Okay.
So within walking distance, or one bus ride.
You really that's interesting. So that I say I'm an exception to that. I mean, it could just be because of my own family, but they were obviously more relaxed about this process of dispersion. So my father grew up in Bromley, and my mother in Sutton Coldfield. And but by the time I was born, we were living in Blackheath, so we had my father's side was not so far away, in Bromley, and but my grandfather was divorced, so he went down to the south coast, and then my grandparents were in North London, Swiss Cottage, so already there. And then by the time I'm going to school, we're up north on the Wirral, and I've got relatives in America, in France. Wow.
I mean, my wider family are dispersed all around the world.
Yes.
But when I grew up, immediate family were comparatively close, and it was not uncommon for people just to drop in unannounced at the weekend. You didn't have to phone up and make an arrangement, make an appointment. People used to pop in unannounced, and my mum every weekend would bake cakes and biscuits and things on the off chance that people were gonna do that. There was always, if people popped in, there were always cakes and biscuits to be had. Because that's how it was.
So you had more people around you in the home on a sort of week-to-week basis, you could say.
Aunts, uncles, cousins.
So this is a phenomenon of modern life, isn't it? That you have a family which doesn't have so many immediate relatives around, and not seeing so many people in the home, something like that.
That's right. And I have a cousin, and we virtually grew up together. and our families would go on holiday together. So I remember, family holidays. We wouldn't go far, so we lived in North London, Southend or Westcliff or somewhere like that was probably the nearest. So we'd stay in a little B&B type place down at Southend, but we'd go as a family group. And certainly my parents didn't have a car, so if we went anywhere, we had to go by bus. I remember they once took me to Whipsnade Zoo. So from North London to Whipsnade Zoo out in the country.
Yes.
I thought it was such an adventure. We had to get something called a Green Line bus.
Oh yes.
Ran out in the countryside.
Yes, sure.
So we had to travel, I don't know, part the way across London to wherever the Green Line buses start from.
Yes.
And then go on this long bus journey out to Whipsnade.
Yeah.
And spent the day at the zoo and have to make the trek home.
Yeah. Okay. So if we jump from that period to now, you've got kids who have been whizzed around Europe or the world even, aren't they? With the low cost airfares. I mean, so even not people who are sort of at the top of the socio-economic ladder, but so that's another big change, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, people's awareness of their surroundings has just sort of grown exponentially, hasn't it?
Yeah, so actual experience of other cultures.
Yeah, my geographical awareness, was obviously quite limited as a child, simply because of the fact that transport was such a factor.
Yeah, that's right.
So your perspective changes hugely, and I think the perspective of different generations changes hugely, simply because of where we started, the speed at which things move on.
Yeah, that's right. So
an overriding sort of feeling for me, I suppose, is one of speed. Life seems to have speeded up enormously.
So in what particular aspects do you notice that most?
Time. It's interesting because it may be a factor of getting old. I heard an explanation of why time seems to move faster as we get older, and put it at its simplest. If you're 4 years old, a year is a quarter of your life. It's quite a big chunk.
Yeah.
If you're 60 years old, it's a 60th of your life. So it's a much smaller chunk. So apparently that's why time seems to speed up as we get older, because they're smaller chunks of our life. But time just seems to move so quickly. You get up in the morning and then so many things have happened. You've done so many things, and your ability, internet shopping. I ordered something one afternoon. It came that same evening on one occasion.
Yeah.
I mean, really? So I think because we're able to do things so much more quickly, time seems to move.
Yeah, and we're in a sort of race, aren't we? It's like to do things more and more quickly, because everybody's doing it more and more quickly. So you have to keep up with that.
Yeah.
That's what I feel.
Yeah, and I think when I think back to sort of my childhood, it was a much slower pace because there was no alternative. You had to learn patience. If you wanted to buy something, you had to save up until you could afford to buy it, because even the old-fashioned hire purchase, your ability to borrow money wasn't such a that was sort of frowned on. If you had to start borrowing money to buy something, that was really sort of frowned on in the early days. So you had to learn patience. You had to learn that you'd put so much away each week. If you you know, as a kid, if you had pocket money and you'd put a little bit away each week because I don't know there was a toy or something you wanted to buy, so you accepted that time, you know, was a factor, that you had to be patient, you know, that you learned that you couldn't have what you wanted when you wanted as quickly as you wanted.
Yes. Yeah, that's changed as well, hasn't it? Well, people, this sort of instant gratification, isn't it? That's the concept.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, in many ways, you know, it's quite sad that you know, our ability to, you know, to wait, our ability to take our time, our ability to be patient has gone out the window somewhat.
Yep. Well, I can see that. I can see that. And certainly, you know, certain parts of the younger generation maybe, you know, have difficulty with that. And we all do, I guess. We're all conditioned by this thing, you know. So it's sort of pressure that we're under.
So those are just some of my reflections of, you know, of the 50s. It was a, you know, I was just a kid, so it was the norm, but I suppose my norm was a time of change and transformation. You know, things were, you know, beginning to happen. There was a freedom that people were unaware of. That it was new beginnings because, as you were saying, lots of bomb sites, but those bomb sites were very slowly starting to be transformed into new and modern buildings.
Yes.
The opportunity was being taken to transform,
yes,
you know, areas. I think it was the start of what were known as garden cities. Whole slum areas of London were being cleared and redeveloped. And the you know, and the residents were being moved out to these new developed new towns, you know, places like Harlow and Welwyn Garden City were these new developments taking people from the slums of London. So it was a time of change and transformation.
Yes, and then we have this, you know, the 50s, so 60s, you know, that was when you had this was sort of expressed culturally, wasn't it? You had these amazing cultural developments.
Yeah, I think that was, you know, maybe that's our next chat.
Well, yeah, that's right. It's this sort of
just flagging it up.
Yeah, flagging it up because it's this sort of consciousness, isn't it? You know, collective consciousness. Something quite very dramatic happened.
Yeah, the 60s were, you know, a time apart, and you know, quite exciting to be part of, really, I suppose.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good. Yeah. Look forward. We'll talk about that probably next time, and I'll be interested. You know, because I was just a little, you know, kid then, but of course, you know, later on in my teen years, we sort of look back. There was always a bit of nostalgia about that period. In many ways, so the music.
I can't claim to be an active participant in that period, but you know, certainly, you know, you lived through it, you were aware of it.
Yeah, that's it.
Around.
Yeah, whatever insights we have on that. Okay, well there we go. We've done another little chunk.
And you know, it's fun just looking back and reminiscing, and you know, just recording some of these things for posterity. Just
so hopefully somebody somewhere clicks with somebody, and they find it useful or interesting.